Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. The current session focuses on sociolinguistic phenomena and a real but exotic world. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the relationship between the two. Well, my dear students, when we talk of the real world, a great deal is to be said about language in relation to society, because we cannot study language by separating it from society or by keeping it in isolation. Well, my dear students, it is the very exotic world of Northwest Amazon that I am going to use as a sample to discuss with you how, in the real world, language operates in the social context. Let me introduce where this area geographically exists. Well, geographically, the area in question is half in Brazil and half in Colombia, coinciding more or less with the area in which a language called Tucano can be relied on as a lingua franca, that is a language that is used for trade purposes and that is a non-native language. Most of the people of this area, they are indigenous Indians divided into over 20 tribes, which are in turn further grouped or divided into 5 phrateries or groups of related tribes. Now, there are 2 crucial facts about these people. First, each tribe speaks a different language that differs sufficiently to be mutually incomprehensible and in some cases genetically unrelated. So, sometimes the language of tribe A would not be understandable for language B, and sometimes even in terms of the language families, these 2 languages would belong to completely different families. Secondly, politically, an important factor is that these 5 phrateries, each phratry that consists of a number of tribes, they are exogamous, that is, man must not marry a woman from the same phratry or tribe. So, a man from one phratry, that is one group of tribes, should not marry a woman within this phratry, should marry a woman outside it, some other tribe from some other group of tribes. What is the linguistic consequence of all this? It is very interesting. A man's wife must speak a language that is different from his own language. Now we need to add a third factor to this situation. And what is the third factor? Marriage is patrilocal. What does it mean? The husband and wife live where the husband was brought up. The wife shifts to the husband's tribe, like it happens in our society, for example. Now, there is also another rule, that the wife should live where the husband was brought up and also use his language in speaking to their children. Now, this couple, this husband and wife, they would have children. What would be the language of the children? The language of the children has to be the language of the father, and the mother, who has a different language, would have to speak the language of the father with their children. The linguistic consequence is, generally what we say that the term that we use, mother tongue. In this case, we do not find that. Mother, in this case, has to use the language of the father with the children. And, this language, of course, is a foreign language to her. One can thus hardly call the children's first language their mother tongue, except for, if in your wild imagination you think of so that it can happen in one of hundreds out of hundreds cases. The reports of this community do not mention any widespread disruption in language learning or general language deterioration. What does it mean? It means despite these adverse circumstances, despite these very poor situations where, the situation is very complex, still language can flourish. Our language or any language or languages can easily develop and flourish. This also shows that a language can be transmitted efficiently and accurately even under adverse circumstances. The mother does not know the language of her husband. Still, she would use that to speak to her children. So, still the children, they learn that language. Now, in this case, what is it that is to be said of language in relation to society? I would say this is a very, very complex picture. But first, there is a question of relating languages as wholes to speakers. Two different phrases, within them, different sets of tribes, a man and a woman from these different tribes using different languages coming together. This is really a very complicated situation. In this case, for any given language X, it will first be necessary to define who are its native speakers. But since this means referring to some tribe, and tribes are primarily defined with reference to their language, there is clearly a problem in that. The solution is either to list all the languages, belonging to these longhouses. By the way, these longhouses are the residences of these tribes. Or to specify the geographical area where the tribes live. But most of the tribes do in fact have their own territories, which does not overlap with the territory of the other tribes. We also need to keep in mind that about a quarter of the native speakers of this language will be made of the married women who are dispersed among other territories. So, if we are talking of one of these tribes, tribe X, what happens to its language? Already 1/4 of its population, that is those women who get married and who go to other tribes and live with their husbands there, 1/4 of this population has already dispersed. Similarly, 1/4 of such population of females would come from other tribes because the young men of this tribe X would get married to women from other tribes. So think of a huge variety of more than 20 tribes who are contributing in terms of language from where all these wives are coming. Indeed, in any given longhouse, it is likely to contain native speakers of a variety of languages on the assumption that brothers need to be attracted to the girls of same other tribe. In addition to the native speakers of language X, there will be people who speak it as non-native speakers with every degree of fluency from almost native speaker fluency to the minimal level of, fluency. So, you would find a huge variety. Anyone wishing to write a grammar of this language X then will have to precisely say for whom the grammar is claimed to be true out of all these speakers, those who are the native speakers or those who are the non-native speakers or those who are fluent in it or those who are not fluent in it. Secondly, there is a question of discourse which also is very, very interesting. How is speech used in social interaction? Are they expected to use language of the longhouse which they are visiting? When one family is visiting the other family, when people from one longhouse are going to the family of the other longhouse, when, these wives of these different men, they are meeting, how language is used. Well, are you visiting another longhouse? Which language would you use? Would you use your own language? Apparently not. The choice of language is based solely on the convenience of people concerned. And this is socially very, very important. Except for the wives, to them this convenience, by the way, is not given. They have to speak the language of their husbands. Otherwise, if you are visiting a neighborhood or a neighbor, otherwise, you can use that neighbor's language. If visitors do not know the longhouse language, but someone there knows their language, they will use the visitor's language when speaking to them. Now comes the question, what about the language itself as a subject of conversation? Here two practical needs are put first, namely the need to know as many languages as possible in order to be able to travel from one tribe to other, in order to communicate with different groups of people. So everyone is expected to be bilingual or multilingual, speaking 2 languages or more than 2 languages in this case, plus, they know the lingua franca, that is Tucano, that is used, for the trade purposes. So almost everybody would know their father's language, their mother's language, and probably some other language as well, plus Tucano as a lingua franca. There are some surprises in this discourse then. There is a rule that if you are listening to someone, to show respect, for the first few minutes, you would just keep on repeating after that person. Word for word, every single word you would repeat as somebody to whom you are showing respect to would speak. For instance, it would be surprising if any of the languages concerned lack a word for longhouse or tribe, and we might reasonably expect a word for fratry. It is very interesting that all these languages have a variety of words for all these purposes. The main source of this complexity is the rule of linguistic exogamy, which might not be accepted to be worldwide. Marrying outside your tribe. This happens somewhere and in some parts of the world, but in some parts of the world, this does not happen. However, the other source is the amount of individual bilingualism, or more accurately, I would call it multilingualism, because people speak 3, 4, or 5 languages, which makes it hard to decide who is the speaker of a given language and who is not.